Good evening and welcome to St. Peter's Hove once more for our next step along the way through the Passion narrative of St. Mark as we build up to Palm Sunday and indeed to the events of Holy Week. We now come to the way of the cross, what we think of as the way of the cross. That is to say, Jesus' long march, his death march from the praetorium to the place of the skull where he's crucified. But St. Mark doesn't give us much detail at all, just says they led him out to crucify him. But this, of course, was part of the theatre of cruelty in which the Romans specialised, the parading of the victim, so that he would take a serpentine route through Jerusalem and out of the city to the place of the skull, so that as many people as possible could see him on his way to execution. And indeed, this used to be done until fairly recently, even in Europe. People being taken to be hanged would be taken through the streets until they were taken to the place of execution. This used to happen in London. People were taken to Tyburn, but they would be dragged through the streets on hurdles first. This gave the population a chance to see what was happening. And of course, it gave the population a chance to witness what was happening and indeed to take part in what was happening. In other words, the crucifixion of Jesus is something in which all the people who see it are complicit, unless, of course, they actually stand out and say, no, I don't want to have anything to do with this. If we ignore the sufferings of Jesus, we're complicit. But if we say, no, we do not agree with this death penalty, this torture and so on, then we're on the side of Jesus. That's very important as we watch this scene unfold, that we take our stand with the crucified, not with the crucifiers, with the tortured man, not with the torturers. And Jesus Christ, in his sadness, in his misery, in his grief, in his blood-stained state, is taking the side of all mistreated people in history, before his time and after his time. He is identifying himself with all those who suffer. Now, this is actually quite a profound idea. It's an idea that comes from St. Augustine, actually, but not just from St. Augustine. St. Augustine says about Christ several times when he's talking about the Psalms, he said, transfiguravit se in nobis. He transfigured himself into us. In other words, every time we suffer, Christ suffers in us, we suffer in Christ. Christ's suffering and our suffering, there's an identity between the two. So insofar as there are suffering people in the world, Christ is suffering with them. Insofar as they suffer with Christ. Therefore, the people who mock Christ on his way to execution are in fact people who mock those on their way to execution, people who mock those who are suffering, are mocking Christ. People who mock Christ on his way to execution are mocking all people who are suffering. For Jesus Christ, in taking up the flesh, is taking the part of all who suffer in the world. He's showing solidarity with them. Now, you know what social justice warriors are, don't you? People who campaign for social justice, I suppose, is what social justice warriors are. Well, we're all social justice warriors, aren't we? But why are we social justice warriors? Why does social injustice upset us? It's because when we see a suffering person, we see the suffering Christ. In other words, our desire for social justice is a desire that is rooted in our love of the suffering Christ, our compassion for the suffering Christ, in wanting to comfort Jesus on his way to execution, and there were some. In wanting to comfort Jesus, we should therefore want to comfort everybody who is in Jesus' position, everyone who is suffering. Well, I've just covered one verse, I think, but I'll cover a few more tomorrow when I talk about Simon of Cyrene. All the very best. Good night.